Hello, all.
Hello, Dr. Humphrey.
How are you today?
Oh, busy. I would like a day off from the busyness.
Well, we've got Labor Day coming up.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
That's right. So you actually get a 3-day, maybe 4.
Oh,
My birthday's
hallelujah.
this week. I can't wait for the 5-day weekend.
Your
Oh,
birthday is when?
happy birthday.
It's Friday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I may have to give you a special point or something today.
I'm turning 20, the big 2-0. I'm excited.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. One more year, you'll be legitimate.
I know.
You'll
I'll
need
actually
to
be able
be
to have
able to buy
fun.
your own drinks.
The only
Excellent.
difference to that is
Excellent.
after 21, it's like,
Real.
yeah.
It does become very real after that.
I know. I'm afraid I'm going to get old and like go to sleep and wake up one day and be 25.
No, not that. Oh my God. What? Oh,
Ouch.
the apocalypse. The world is ending.
The world is ending. Well,
Trust
I
me.
remember being 10 and being like, oh, in 10 years I'm going to be 20. And now like it's 10 years.
When you hit 25, the new target will be 30. And when you hit 30, it'll be 40. So don't be concerned. Yeah. Remember I said the day that we're born is the day that we start to die. Right? So the value is what we do between those two periods or those two ends. So 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, just be happy and look for satisfaction across that sphere, and you will find very quickly that it's just another day.
Well, thank you for your advice.
You're most welcome, and I'm
It
available
is very good advice.
available for parties.
Hey. On my 25th birthday, when I'm having a mental breakdown, I'll just call you up. Dr. Humphrey.
Well, I will hopefully still be in Northern Virginia so you can reach out. But if not, I'll be on LinkedIn, so that'll help.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. We still got a minute or two before we start. So any questions on anything that we covered on Monday before we begin the day?
So main focus of that last class was correlations, right?
Yes.
Okay. No,
Yeah,
I
we
don't
did
have
correlations, and then I believe we just did start chapter 2.
Right.
Right. So did you have some questions about correlations?
No, Professor, we never started chapter 2. We finished with the video.
Oh, for chapter 1. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great.
We were
Yeah, that's
about to
great.
start.
Yeah,
That
no,
really
that's
was
fine.
a good video.
Yeah, we'll be a-okay. We'll be a-okay.
Wasn't there like a certain percentage? There was numbers involved at one point that I just forgot about.
Numbers
Right?
related to the
Yeah,
class?
like the negative, how negative the correlation was.
Oh, the correlation. Yeah, that's the strength of the correlation.
So how do we tell the strength of correlation?
Because remember, the variables correlation isn't causation, right?
Right.
That means that it's simply a relationship that is based on the state of each of the variables.
Mm-hmm.
So as one variable changes its state, we look to see if the other variable also changes its state. So the strength is how often they change as one changes, the other changes. So if it's a 98%, plus 98%, then we're saying that the relationship that when one moves, 98% of the time, so does the other one.
Oh, okay.
So that's the way we look at the strength of the relationship.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was my only question.
Okay, good.
Because I zoned out for a minute, and then I looked back, and all of a sudden there was numbers, and I was like, wait a minute.
Well, that's okay, because in the previous class, I asked a question, and 3 people responded, and then someone actually responded to the wrong question. So I figured quite a few people had zoned out. So I have a new standard now that when I ask a question that you have to put into the chat room, I give about 5 seconds for everybody to respond. And those who are paying attention will be able to do it within that period. Those who aren't will give a late response. But then I'll also know, theoretically, I will know that they, at that particular point in time, were not paying attention.
What if they just have bad internet connection?
Or slow typists.
Then if they've got a bad internet connection, then they definitely weren't paying attention. Okay.
Touche.
All right. Okay. We've got 1 more minute. So any other questions? Chapter 2 is one of our good chapters. I like that chapter. Well, I like them all, but chapter 2 is one of the ones we can really dig deep into. So I'll go ahead and bring it up.
Oh, actually, Professor,
Yeah.
which chapters is the first exam gonna be on?
1 through 4.
Okay.
Yeah. And if I need to change the date, depending on the amount of information that we have, because of course Monday's Labor Day, so we won't have class on Monday. So if I need to move the date, you'll know ahead of time when the date is going to be moved to. It won't be more than a week, but if it's not going to be on the exact date of the syllabus, I'll give you enough time ahead of that to adjust.
Speaking of which, I looked at the syllabus or the dates for projects, and I noticed that it was only the story one, not the movie one, that were there. Did you remove the one with the movie project, or?
No, I haven't removed it. I just haven't shared it with you yet.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Phew. I thought I was reading something wrong there.
No, often because I do want everyone to use what we're discussing in the class to write their stories. But if I publish all of them, then I have some folks who like to just get it out of the way. And they end up not getting the best grade because they haven't used the things that we've talked about in class for that period. So rather than creating that temptation, I just haven't published it yet.
Okay. I got it. I get this.
Okay, cool. All right, so today is chapter 2. I don't know if we'll finish it. I mean, it's not as large as chapter 6 and 7 and those, but we'll just work through it until we get to it. So chapter 2 is neuroscience and biological foundations. So we'll look at some of the things biologically and how the neurology of our thoughts, behaviors, and feelings manifest themselves, and even genetically, what causes that to happen. So starting is, of course, who we are. So behavioral genetics, as I shared, I believe I shared on the first class, but if I didn't, I'll simply be redundant. But the idea is that we are all blueprints, and we are as a result of a specific blueprint. And that blueprint is first created or started as a result of conception. Now, if you look at the head of a pencil or head of a pen, the egg that is released by a female during the monthly cycle is probably 1,000 times smaller than the head of a pencil. And so if you look at the first graphic, it's got the picture of an egg, but also has a picture of a sperm cell. So think of it, if an egg is 1,000 times smaller than the head of a pencil, then the sperm cell is 1,000 times or much smaller than the head of a pencil, because it's 1,000 times smaller than the egg cell. And unless there are identical twins, then there is only one egg cell or egg that is populated by the sperm cell to cause conception. If they're fraternal twins, then one of the very few instances in life, then 2 eggs are fertilized. And so you actually have 2 beings in 2 separate sacs that are created and that will become boy, girl, whatever they're going to become. But again, thinking about that, this idea of conception, something that is so minuscule, yet has the blueprints for everything that you will become: your bone structure, your hair color, your eye color, your weight, your height, even the formation of your bones and whether you have hair on your arms or not. All of that stuff is contained in that single starting cell that duplicates everything, or at least part of your mom and part of your dad. And so that's where the 46 comes in. There are 23 cells from mom and 23 cells from dad. That is the norm. So 46 chromosomes is the average number and is the expected number of chromosomes that will create your DNA structure, that will create a blueprint for who you are going to become. That the result of that chromosomal structure is that the DNA determines when it's going to turn a particular part of the cell on or turn a particular part of the cell off. In some instances, as a result of it being turned on, you are taller. In some instances, as a result of it being turned off, you're shorter, right? But none of that is known up front. It is dictated by a combination. And if the process is managed correctly, managed by this creative blueprint, then you end up as the person you are, with the color eyes, color hair, all of those things. Every cell that is created has those 46 chromosomes as a part of its blueprint. At the very beginning, our blueprints would identify if it's an XY chromosome from mom and dad, then you're a boy. If both chromosomes from mom and dad are X chromosomes, then you are a girl. And so all of that is established up front. Now, biologically, we know that sometimes as a result of the fetal and embryonic stage, that certain cells get turned on when they're not supposed to. And which is why we also know biologically that a man can be, or someone in a man's body can actually have more feminine qualities and traits. And a woman in a female's body can have more male traits. It is simply genetic and biological. In one particular instance, if you get more than 46 chromosomes, if you get another chromosome where you have 47, that generally indicates Down syndrome. So Down syndrome is a factor of having an extra chromosome during this creation of DNA. All right, now, during this period for nature or nurture, on average, a female will have no more, or will create no more than 400 eggs. And of course, each cycle for each monthly cycle releases one egg, and it is either fertilized or it is discarded. And like I said, in very few instances, 2 eggs will be fertilized, but that's an anomaly. And then of course you have fraternal twins. But just like a house, if you go to a housing development area, they will show you model homes. Those model homes will have a kitchen space, they will have a bedroom space, they will have a bathroom space, they will have all of those spaces that are predetermined. Well, that's the same for your DNA. The structure, your blueprint, is already predetermined. Now, what happens with that is what we do once we buy the house. Then we start to populate it with the things that define our level of comfort and what we want our environment to be. So with your DNA, after the billions of chromosomes or billions of cells have been created, at the very beginning, before they are assigned to any particular function, we are all exactly the same. And if you look at the structure, humans have, again, unless there's some disorder or some problem during the fetal stage, There's 2 arms, 5 fingers on each hand, 5 toes, 2 legs, heart, lungs, stomach, all of those things. So the generic blueprint is established. The thing that changes are called stem cells. So all of our original cells are stem cells. Stem cells are uncommitted cells. So before they have been identified for a particular structure, one is no different than the other. But what happens during the embryonic stage is that the signals that identify, the triggers that identify which cells are going to be what, periodically, either the first week, second week, third week of conception, will then target certain cells, stem cells. Then those cells become committed. And so one cell or a set of cells will be for hair. A set of cells will be for bone. A set of cells will be for muscle. And so all of those cells are now determined, which means they are no longer stem cells. Now they are committed structures to building your blueprint. Okay? So that's what happens here. Now, the idea again of nature versus nurture. Nature is genetic and biological predispositions. So if we say something, our behavior, our thoughts, our feelings, our actions are as a result of nature, then they are saying that it's as a result of your genetic makeup. If it is nurture, they're saying that it's as a result of your environment and social condition. Now, it doesn't mean that we aren't accepting that both can exist. Some just lean more toward saying that we are genetically predisposed, and others will offer that once we have our blueprints formed, then everything else is a function of our social and environmental conditions.
Yeah, but that's only half of it for the environmental conditions. There are conditions like depression, dyslexia, dysgraphia, autism that are in the genetic field and not in regards to environment.
Okay, so let's address that, Mark. So I can have a predisposition that is genetically predetermined, right? But if I am autistic or if I have depression and I'm in an environment that promotes that, then it exacerbates the condition, right? So it's not one or the other, it's both. So yes, it can be genetic, but I can also have depression that was not genetically predisposed as a result of social conditions where I feel like people are picking on me, I'm bullied, I'm not achieving the things that I want to achieve. I can become depressed then as well. I mean, people who have PTSD weren't born with it, right? So yeah, there are some instances when it will be genetic, and there are other instances when the environment and social condition can cause a very similar disorder or dysfunction.
Okay, I see the point there. There's a few things I didn't really think about when I said that.
Well, that's okay, because I mean, I say a lot of things that I don't think about, but as a result of sharing them with you guys and you sharing them with me, we can have this level of discussion. So I appreciate it. Yeah, you don't have to think it all the way through. It's a good starting point. So thanks. Okay. So when we look at the neuron, so these cells that comprise every part of our body. So all of your senses, there are 5 external senses and another 22 that are internal. But the primary senses and how our body interacts within itself is through these neurons. And so notice the basic building block, the nerve cell of the nervous system. So all of those neurons are what signals our brain to certain conditions: pain, happiness, laughter, sadness, depression, euphoria, whatever it is. And also, as our body needs certain nutrients, internally, our body signal the brain so that hormones and chemical processes can be started so that we can function at least as best as we can. So the neurons are responsible for receiving, processing, and transmitting electrochemical information. Okay, so now, is there someone on the call? I need someone who speaks another language as a primary language. and I need someone who only speaks one language. So I need 2 people to turn on their videos.
I speak 2 languages.
I speak
Uh,
one.
okay, so let's see, who do we have? So do you speak, which is your primary language?
My primary language will be Spanish.
Okay, good. That's good. Okay, so hold on a minute. I see, let's see who we have down here. Steven. Steven, what's your primary language? Do you,
I primarily speak English.
yeah, do you speak Spanish?
Very little, but not enough to like really. I
Okay.
can understand it somewhat, but not fully speak it. No.
Okay, that's good enough for government work. Okay, so let's see. With Diego,
Yes.
I would like for you to say something really advanced in Spanish, and then I want Stephen to take a gander at translating it.
Ok. Hace un mes tuve una cirugía que se llama la paroscopia para un caso de apendicitis.
Okay, Stephen, the eyebrows went up like that.
I'm not sure if I heard it correctly. I thought he
Yeah.
said something about going to the bathroom, I think.
Nah.
No.
Shall I repeat it?
No,
Sure,
that's
yeah.
okay. This was perfect. Trust me, guys. And Stephen, by not being able to translate it, you actually helped the point that I'm going to make now.
Yeah.
So that's why I picked people who. Now, is there anyone other than Diego who speaks Spanish and English
I do.
fluently? Okay, good. Who is that?
It's Alex.
Okay, Alex, good. So I'm going to use Alex in my example, but I'll use him after I first give you an idea of what it is where I'm trying to present. So on the screen, let's say that I have a cube, and I'm going to color that cube, and then I'm going to create another cube, and I'm going to put a different color for that cube. Okay, so let's see. I can see Sydney and I can see Kathy. So let's start with Sydney. Sydney, what's that color on the left?
What?
What's that color on the left?
Like the blue color?
Okay. All right. So how do you know it's blue?
Because I looked at it and it looks blue.
Okay, so why isn't the one on the right? Why aren't they the same?
Because they're not the same color.
How do you know that?
I don't know. My brain is telling me that they're not.
Huh?
I don't know. My brain says they're clearly not the same color. My eyes.
Okay. Well, that's a good starting point. I like that. Okay. So your brain, which means that you either have memory of and or knowledge of what colors are supposed to be, and then as a result of that, you make a comparison and you say, based on what I know, this is blue, and this is tan or whatever color it is. Okay, so good. We're going to start, and then I'm going to go to Lars. So Lars, how did she see the colors?
She, just by looking at them.
How did she look at them? How would she, what do we do to look at a color? What needs to happen?
Our eyes have to, light reflects on our eyes, and then our brain perceives what colors that I think the light that isn't absorbed. Is that
Okay.
how that works?
No, that's a very good start. Actually, that's a very good start. So good. All right. So Lars, you got the dollar friend, so somebody helped you. All right. So here's the idea. And she's absolutely right that there are rods and cones at the back of our eyes, our retina. And those rods and cones work on certain frequencies. So because they're only the colors that you have available to you as a foundation are red, green, and blue. That's it. Everything else is a combination of those three. So the rods at the back of our eyes work on frequencies. So frequency 1 represents red, frequency 2 represents green, and frequency 3 represents blue. So now if I know that there's a spectrum of frequencies, and across that spectrum, when it gets these frequencies, well, that's not the color I want. When it gets those frequencies, they're blue. When it gets these frequencies, it's green. And when it gets these frequencies, it's red. It doesn't matter that the back of the point is still the same. Right? So then a combination of those, if I have a combination of these, then whatever blue and green is will give me that combination. Whatever green and red create, it'll give me that combination. And so as a result of that, we learn and we have assigned a particular color, because as Sydney said, the brain, as a result of knowing and having been taught that one color is that color, then when our brains get that, we associate it with that color or the name of that color. So that's why we know the difference between blue and yellow and green and red and all of those. Not because the brain automatically tells us what it is. It's because we have knowledge and we have learned what is associated with those frequencies. And as a result, and of course scientifically, all they had to do was take a representative retina and then create these cone structures so that certain frequencies, put light to that, and then they could project it, and they would see that it was, in fact, as a result of those frequencies, blue, green, or red. So that's what happens with our eyes. So now, next question. Let me see who else I want to grab very quickly. Oh, nobody else is. Okay, I know Alex is on. So Alex, since I know red, green, and blue, what kind of frequencies are those? When I look at light, what kind of frequency is that?
I'm not really sure.
Okay, anyone else want to help?
Isn't light measured in wavelengths?
Is what type of wavelengths?
Ultraviolet.
Yeah, I was supposed. Oh, optical wavelengths.
Yeah. All right, that's fine. So I think it's optics, right? So optical frequencies. Yes, and it is wavelengths, but it's optical frequencies. Well, okay, Alex, I'm gonna come back to you because I got to give you 2 chances, buddy. All right. So,
Okay.
what type of frequencies or signals do we use in our brain?
Neurological? Neurons?
Electrical.
Yes. So electrochemical. All right. Okay. So now, let's say that the optical frequencies are English. And the electrochemical frequencies are Spanish.
Mhm.
So just like the example we had with our 2 volunteers, if these are different languages, then how do they understand? How does the brain understand if it speaks Spanish? How does it translate English? Right? So Stephen was our optical, and who was it? Diego was our Spanish. Well, unless we have something that understands both, there's no translation. So you may burn your finger or put it on a hot plate, but if it can't be translated into a signal that the brain can use, then it doesn't understand that you're getting burned. So that's where I said I would use Alex later. Alex comes in and he fits right in the middle because he understands English and Spanish. So now we've got a mechanism called Alex that can translate our senses into information that the brain can use. So it's called transduction, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's the idea. So when we go back to the slide, and the slide identifies that we need, or that the nerve cells receive, process, and transmit electrochemical information. Well, it's not received electrochemically. It's received in the form, so whether it is hertz for hearing, or whether it's optical for seeing, whether it's smell, whether it's taste, or a touch, all of those have its own signal. Those signals have to be received by the nerve cell, processed for translation, and then transmitted chemically back to the brain. So that's what the neurons do. The glial cells are just like our bodies in that our bodies need certain nutrients. Parts of our body need certain nutrients. So by eating, our stomach, digests that food, and then the nutrients that are supposed to go to the right places, go to the right places, our liver, kidney, heart, and all of those. And so it maintains its functionality. Well, neurons also need to be fed. So neurons are fed by glial cells. So the glial cells are the membranes around the neuron that provide nutrition and food, if you will, for the neurons. Glial cells have their own communication channels, as well as we will see that neurons also have a communication channel. So as we look at the neuron, this becomes the structure of a neuron. Now, neurons are individual. They are not multi-set, so you don't have a big group of neurons connected together. Each neuron is independent. And we'll take a look at why in a moment. So let's go to a different slide again, and I'm going to put this up and we'll explain it this way. All right. Excuse me. So let's see. Oh, Kim, Alden?
Alden, yeah.
Alden? Okay, Alden's on. So Alden, you're going to help me now.
All right.
So I've got this piece of property, and this piece of property is called Dulles Airport.
Right.
Okay. All right. So I've got Dulles Airport. So what do we have at an airport?
Airplanes.
Okay. And all right. So what else? We've got airplanes. What are some of the other designated parts of an airport?
You have like gates.
Okay. Gates at different terminals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What else?
People are there.
Yeah, no, that's good. We absolutely need them. So, okay.
There's luggage,
Okay. So the stuff that people carry, and I'm sorry?
The runways.
Okay, we've got the runway. And we have security, right? So we'll just look at those three, and I'm going to apply these to the idea of a neuron. So the people get on a plane, or they go to a terminal, and at the terminal, they get on the plane, and the plane then leaves Dulles and takes them to another location. So let's say Atlanta, for lack of a better one. And then at Atlanta, the same process happens over again. Either they do what at Atlanta? They're going to do one of two things. What are they going to do?
They're going to leave the airport or get back on the aircraft.
Okay, right. So they have either reached their destination, or they're going to get back on the plane and fly to a different destination. So there may be multiple places that they need to get to in order to get to their destination, or Atlanta might be their destination. So here's the deal as we look at this and apply it to the neuron. The neuron, as Alden said, we have people, and those people are going to come to the airport. So dendrites, these fingers that are outside this upper area, dendrites are the points that they receive information from other locations. So if one neuron is sending information, the way that the second neuron gets that information is it's received at the dendrite level. So these are dendrites. That's where the information comes in. Now, let's say you've got a 3-hour layover. So the people that came into the airport are received, they enter the airport, but then they sit in the lounge for 3 hours until the next plane is ready to leave. So notice that the place where they leave from are called terminals. So it's just like the airport example. So terminal buttons are used to transmit or to send information out. Dendrites is where information comes in. The cell body is used to house the information until it needs to be transferred or is needed somewhere else. When it is needed somewhere else, then it travels along the body of the neuron, and each of these locations here are called axons. And you can think of it this way. When you go outside and speak, your voice, if someone is close to you, they can hear everything and even the volume of it. But if someone is a great distance away from you, then your voice tends to diminish, and someone along a great distance away may not hear you. Well, if I want my message to be received all the way down the line, then I want that signal replenished so that the person at the end of the line hears the same thing that the person who's closest to me. So the axons are responsible for ensuring the integrity and the signal strength of that information, so that once it gets to the terminal buttons, it's sent out and the information is strong enough that it can be received by the other neuron. Now, let's look at one other part of the neuron, and that's myelin sheath. So myelin sheath is simply an external coating around the axon. It maintains the integrity of the signal. So here's the example. If you have a water hose, as long as the water hose has a good outside covering, then all of the water gets from the spigot out to the end of the hose, and you get all the water delivered. However, if the covering of the hose has lost its integrity, you know, there's a hole in the hose or it's worn out, then part of the water escapes. So part of the information, the water that you want to get to the end of the hose, doesn't get there, which means it degrades the capability of the water at the end. Same thing here. So myelin sheath is not, it is not on all axons, but those areas of the brain that are designated for highly or high level or emergency level information doesn't need to have any of that information diminished or degraded. So the myelin sheath protects the integrity of the signal, but also, for lack of a better term, prevents leakage. Okay, so since these are independent, the only way that they communicate with the other billion neurons is through terminal buttons to send information to other ones and dendrites to receive information from other ones. Okay, all right, so now, yes.
So if somebody's missing myelin sheathing, does that affect the neurons that are transmitted in the brain?
No, it doesn't affect it because unless Alex, unless it is myelin sheath is supposed to be there. If it is somehow was supposed to be there and gets degraded, there is some thought that that could also contribute to Alzheimer's or dementia, because now the ability of that neuron that is responsible for a certain function doesn't function as well.
Okay, that makes sense now.
Yeah. So not all of them are responsible for that emergency like critical information, but those that are have a specific function, and if the myelin sheath that's supposed to be there somehow gets degraded, it can impact the function of that, which, if it's a memory neuron, could affect our ability for memory and recall. Okay. So what happens to get that information out of the cell body is this, and I will use another example. I'm loaded with these, and hopefully they work. All right, so since everybody's familiar with cable, I think, you have cable television, right? So if I look at a battery, a simple car battery, there are terminals on the battery. There's a positive and there's a negative. So current flows from negative to positive, voltage from positive to negative. But your car doesn't start unless it has a battery, because the battery provides energy to the motor or the engine so that the engine turns its pistons and the spark plugs ignite and burn gas and give you energy. So this flow only happens if there is a complete circuit from negative to positive. And some of you know that sometimes your battery dies. And if the battery dies, now you don't have this circuit completed because these aren't working and your car doesn't start. And then sometimes you can actually have on one of these terminals, you can have corrosion. And because that corrosion blocks the ability of the signal to get out into this process, your car also won't start. So there has to be, that's why one is negative and the other is positive, there has to be what is called a difference, and that's just delta, a difference in potential. If they were both positive, you wouldn't have current flow. If they were both negative, you wouldn't have current flow. So there's a reason that one is positive and one is negative. Because once I put all of these little electrons and protons and all of those out here, they are attracted, opposites attract, remember that statement? They are attracted to the other neurons and electrons that are different. And so as a result of that attraction, it flows, the energy or the current flows through your engine and your car starts. Well, with a neuron, it is very similar. So I've got my terminal buttons and I have my dendrites. Well, remember, once the dendrites receive information, the information sits in the cell body until it is needed, until there's a request from another cell that it wants that information. Well, in order for that to happen, there also has to be a difference in potential between the two positions. When the potential is great enough, then this information, the electrochemical signals, are attracted to the other end of the neuron, and it gets loaded on the terminals, the ones that are needed. And then, of course,
it fires to the other side.
I'm sorry?
And it fires to the opposite charge. So it's a positive, it'll fire at the negative neuron.
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. And so this gap is the separation point between one neuron and the other. And so nothing crosses this boundary until there is a request or call made that gets accepted. So I'll give you this example and then we'll move on. Cell phones, right? Because you have a lot of numbers stored in your phone, but you can hit them all And you can dial them all, but if the other person doesn't pick up, you don't get to complete that call. And that's the same thing here. If the other neuron doesn't pick up, then you don't complete the transfer of that information from one neuron to the other. Okay. All right. So that's what it's showing here. When it's stable and you have the exact same without any difference in potential, nothing happens. But once it is depolarized, and that information then can be open and channeled through, and it's much more complex, guys, trust me. But for a foundational class, this is good enough. The idea is that then the information can flow and transfer over to another neuron. Now, as well, as I mentioned, there is a gap between one neuron and another, and that's called the synaptic gap. So the gap between where one neuron sends information and the other receives it is called the synaptic gap. So until that gap is satisfied between these two, there's a call made, then the information gets flooded. So you can see these axon terminal button. So the terminal button, because that's where it's going to transfer from. And then this is a dendrite over here for the receiving neuron. And then this gap exists between the two. So these neurotransmitters electrochemically are going to be attracted or called by this other neuron. These little neurotransmitters will be released from the terminal buttons, and they will flood into this synaptic gap, and they will stay there for a while. The dendrite of the receiving neuron will reshape itself so that those neurotransmitters fit into the space that the receiving neuron has created, right? So it's almost like a pass key. So this neuron says, in order for you to send stuff to me, the only way I will accept it is that it fits into the passcode, the pass key that I created. If they don't fit, it doesn't accept it, which effectively means, guys, and it's this: not every neuron needs to receive every transmission. Only certain ones, dependent on the path that it's going to take through the neural network. So if it's not a part of that neural network, it says, no, I don't want the signal. The ones that are part of it says, yeah, I do. And so it has to code itself to make sure that it's the one getting the right pieces of information. I think there's another slide, and if it isn't, I'll come back to this one. Yeah, here we go. All right, so this would be the receiving neuron, so this would be a dendrite. This is the transmitting neuron, so this would be a terminal button. So these neurotransmitters are released into the synaptic gap, and then the structure, the code for the receiving neuron is one that this will fit into. If they fit, then that receiving neuron takes them and transfers them on down the line. The sending neuron always gives more than is needed. So once it gets whatever it needs to send the signal, the rest of these are still out there. So what the sending neuron will do is say, okay, if you weren't used, we'll use you the next time. Come back home. And that's reuptake. So those that are extra go back into the sending neuron, and they remain there until the next time they're needed. But that happens across the synaptic gap. Okay? So once the synapses fire, then there's transfer between these two entities. Okay, clear? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, good. All right. So we'll move a little bit further, because that's the core of what happens there. And again, there's a lot more, and we're going to talk later about the different types of drugs and the effect on the neural transmission, whether it is an amphetamine, or whether it is a pharmaceutical drug, or whether it is something that is a depressant type of drug, whether they are legal or illegal. We'll talk about what happens with those in a little bit, not right now. Oh, actually, we will talk about it right now. All right, so this is what happens. So Mark, you mentioned before that we could be genetically depressed, and I indicated that we can also be socially depressed. And so the idea is this: when there is formal and normal operation, you'll notice that here, the purple bottom, this would be the dendrite. So the dendrite positions itself in the shape of a triangle. So then the neurotransmitter that's coming over from the other neuron fits into it perfectly. And as long as it fits, then it transfers it through the nerve, and it gets to the part of the body that says, yep, that's hot. What can also happen is the body is structured so that if it doesn't fit, then it doesn't transmit to that particular cell. Now, one of the things that can happen, if this doesn't work right and all of them are getting it, then you start experiencing pain in every part of your body. Well, some of those receptors aren't supposed to be turned on. So what happens there when we introduce drugs, whether they are pharmaceutical or whether they are illegal or anything else, what happens is this drug called an agonist, generally that's with an amphetamine, what happens is now it mimics the same shape of the original neurotransmitter. And so as far as the receptor is concerned, it's legitimate. And since it's legitimate, it plugs this up so it doesn't shut down. And since it doesn't shut down, guess what happens with all of these extra neurotransmitters? They don't go back. They continue to flood this particular neuron. So now, instead of you just being happy, you are crazy happy, right? Because you're getting more than you're supposed to get, right? So that's the idea. So when these don't work properly, or you give them a substance that mimics or looks like what the original neurotransmitter is, the brain or the receiving neuron thinks it's the same thing. And it continues to accept it because the normal would allow it to shut down. This doesn't allow it. And then we'll have some antagonist drugs, which now stop our senses from reacting. And so notice it still fits in there, but what it does is it locks in place. Now, an agonist drug, and I'll show you this, an agonist drug stops this side of the equation, so the transmitter, because with an agonist drug, it doesn't want these things to come back because they can't be used. So an agonist drug will block the reuptake. And these things can't go back and they continue to go into the receiver. An antagonist drug blocks the receiver. So since it blocks the receiver, it can't get the information that it needs. And so subsequently, you may not feel pain. You may be paralyzed, right? There are some drugs that literally affect your ability to feel, and you become euphoric or highly depressed or whatever it is. But notice in some of these, it can paralyze muscles, including those involved in breathing and pulse rate and all of those. So if it blocks the neuron, it now can't receive the information that it's supposed to get. So that circuit doesn't activate. So it's like cutting the line on the battery terminal for the car. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. It gets sexy. All right. So.
Got that?
All right. So last thing, because I mentioned cable, I want to show you an example of that. And this also relates to the use of the myelin sheath. So if I have cable, and this is going to be an archaic drawing, but it'll work for governments. All right, so I've got the cable. And we know that with cable, signals audio and vision or visual signals come in from Verizon or Comcast or Cox or wherever. They come in and they go into the RG6 or to your network cable. And that information then ends up getting to the connector that you have into your cable box. And then your cable box sends that signal to your television. Well, you also know, and this is an old television, so these are antenna, right? So you also know that sometimes your television signal gets blurred. Well, this sheath, the part of the cable, is supposed to be strong enough to keep these signals from getting out. So it keeps them contained inside. But if there's a lot of weather, heat, and it diminishes the shield of this cable, then some of the signal leaks out. And since it leaks out, all of that signal doesn't get here. So what's left is what you get on the television, and it's blurry. The picture's not very good.
So, Professor, is the myelin sheathing insulated or not? Like, is the insulation?
Yes, the myelin sheath is the insulation. Yep, absolutely. That's the perfect way to look at it, Alex.
Okay.
The myelin sheath becomes the insulation for the signals transferring through the axons. Now, we also talked about this difference in potential. Well, there's another thing in cable stuff, and I'll use a different color. So they actually put around the copper, they put aluminum. Because aluminum and copper have different properties. So they coat it so that the signal continues to be attracted from one end of the cable to the other. And so that's our difference in potential that happens even with our transfer of information through the neuron. So that's an example that at least everyone is formally aware of. You have cable in your house, I guess. All right, so that's the idea. So we have difference in potential so that the signal travels, like the neuron. We have myelin sheath or coating so that the signal doesn't escape. And then we have a receiving point, our dendrites, and we have a transmit point, which are our terminal buttons. So all of this mimics exactly what happens with our neural pathways. Okay? All right, so that's that. So let's move a little further. The hormones, the triggers as a result of our senses and neural pathways, they are triggers for the body to respond, and they're going to respond chemically. So the endocrine system, and we'll look at that in a larger view in a moment, but the endocrine system are all of those networks, all of those glands that we use throughout our entire body from toe to the top of our head that are responsible, the endocrine system responsible for the manufacture. So when the brain says, oh, I'm depressed, send me depressing hormones. Or if I'm trying to get out of that state, send me happy hormones. Or if I'm happy, what are the chemicals and hormones that support my remaining happy? So the endocrine system is responsible for that. And then the hormones are those chemical messengers. So do I get happy hormones? Do I get sad hormones? You know, fear hormones, whatever they are. And so the endocrine system generates or causes that to happen. And then the hormones are generated, they flow through our body and cause our bodies to reflect our state of being. Because you guys know that if you are really depressed or sad, your body feels heavy. You feel tired. Your entire body feels tired. However, if you feel or think that you are really happy and euphoric, your entire body feels like it has energy. So these hormones actually are received by almost every part of the body, and it influences not only how we feel, but even our thoughts associated with that. So the endocrine system, Yeah.
Quick question. Does sleep affect depression and happiness in any way or no?
Yes, it does. And I'll, that's in chapter 4, but Alex, I'm going to go ahead and explain part of it now because of that. Something, and it's not in our class, but it's something that is worth understanding. So here is a bad picture of a person with a really big head. Okay, so it's ET. All right, so this person, our brain, this mass up here, our brain has activities from the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep. And those activities are just like the terminal buttons on a battery. If they don't get cleaned, they don't get cleaned up, then the corrosion stops the ability of the signals to transfer, to fulfill their path. So our brain, those neurons, remember, every neuron is separate. And so the synaptic gap between our neurons are where all of those neurotransmitters are. And so think of it, all day, all of the activities that you're having is creating corrosion between those neurons. Well, when we sleep, it's very interesting. When we sleep, the neurons actually separate even further. They become further apart, or effectively what happens is they get smaller. There is one chemical that is only produced in the 4th stage of sleep. And that one chemical during the 4th stage of sleep is like body wash. It's X. So it goes through and it's only produced then, and it washes out all of the corrosion between the neurons. So if you don't get enough sleep, then the ability of the brain to create that hormone, that chemical that goes in and washes the brain, doesn't function properly. And so as a result of too much corrosion, you start to lose the capability for all of your neurons to connect. So yeah, sleep does have an impact on our state of being and even our memory and other things.
Sometimes you can be depressed all day, and then when you fall asleep, and then the next day you wake up and you're like, man, what was I depressed about in the first place? I feel great now.
It's possible, because the other part of that is depression is mostly a conscious activity. During your during your 4th stage of sleep, your conscious brain shuts down. It literally turns off. And your subconscious brain takes over.
And
While
would that be REM sleep?
Yes. Yep, your rapid eye movement. So during your 4th stage of sleep, your conscious mind shuts down and the subconscious mind takes over. Your sub-programming. Remember Dr. Lipton, you know, that sub-programming, because those are the sub-programs that we operate from. So in order for your brain not only to repair itself and for your body to heal itself and for parts of your body to rest, that REM sleep is necessary. So all of these things for reparation happen while you're asleep. So depression is a conscious activity because you're actually looking at and assuming the stimuli and triggers that are causing that depression. You're thinking about it. When you go into a deep sleep, you're not thinking about it anymore. And if anything, it may manifest itself as a dream. But if it's not a dream, then the rest of your body doesn't care about your depression. It's trying to repair itself. But as soon as you wake up, the conscious mind goes back online. And then if, in fact, your body has maintained its level of activity with respect to depression, it starts because you wake up and you remember the depression. So then you repeat that state and your body goes back into that state. But if you wake up and you don't remember why you were depressed, then your body says, I'm starting over. I don't remember what that was. Okay, so yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that.
You are welcome, sir.
What
All
was,
right.
what's the
Yeah.
name of the chemical?
You know, I was beating my head when I was drawing it, trying to remember what it was. But I will find it. I will find that, and I will tell you what it is.
Thank you. That was very interesting.
Okay. All right. So
What's your opinion on lucid dreaming?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, what's your opinion on lucid dreaming?
Lucid dreaming, it's real. Because lucid dreaming can be prompted, or it can be as a result of a very significant series of events. So there are people who condition themselves to what they want to dream about. And so they go through their day repeating or looking at things that will remind them of that particular event, that particular state. And they do it so often that when they fall asleep, the brain has already been conditioned toward that state. So lucid dreaming is real.
How connected is lucid dreaming to dissociative disorders?
It doesn't, it's probably more related to schizophrenia than it is to dissociative identity disorder.
Oh, I didn't mean DID, just dissociative disorders in general, disassociation in general. But if it's,
Yeah, and that too tends, most of the psychological disorders manifest themselves as a conscious event, not a subconscious event. And lucid dreaming tends to be when you are in a subconscious state.
Okay.
Yeah.
How related is, I guess, would maladaptive dreaming be more related to disassociation than lucid dreaming is?
I think disassociation and simply a psychological disorder.
Yeah.
Right, because you've conditioned, and remember, and it's saying is pretty much true as far as I'm concerned. Your thoughts drive behavior.
Yeah.
And so if you continue to think negatively, your body responds because those negative identifiers are signals to the brain that you're in that particular state, and then the brain supports that state. Yeah. So, and we're going to talk about psychological disorders more, I think, in chapter 11. And we're also going to talk about sleep, I think, in chapter 4. So, but this is a depiction of the endocrine system. So we aren't going to cover all of these. And guys, you aren't responsible. You don't have to learn what is in here. You know, if you're a nursing major, you'll learn this in another class. And if you're not, this is just intro. But the idea is that the signals, all of these things are connected. So the signals that are received in the brain, there's the subconscious programming that manages your sugar level, right? Calcium levels, regulate sexual function, and even how once we go through puberty, the ovaries for female sex hormones and testes for male hormones. All of that is a part of the endocrine system. The pituitary gland, you know, hormones that affect lactation and other things. And then the hypothalamus is responsible partially for your anxiety. So once you are heightened fear or stress, the hypothalamus is triggered by the amygdala. It says, I need some getaway drugs. So give me more adrenaline and other things that will allow me to either fight more and or to run away faster than I ever thought I could. So notice your pineal gland, also part of the endocrine system, regulates sleep cycle and body rhythms, right? So there can be concussions, or there could be, you know, physical things that could happen as a result of accidents, concussions, and even sleep deprivation that can cause these particular things to go out of whack. As simple as flying from Virginia to California and staying more than 3 days. Because part of it, and we'll talk about this more again when we talk about sleep, but the sun still interacts with our natural body. And the sun coming up is a signal that our body's supposed to return to conscious state. And when the sun goes down, it's a natural signal that our body is supposed to start going into a subconscious state.
What if you go to the basement? Like, what if you travel somewhere and you're in the basement and there's no light?
Yeah, if there's, well, remember, it's dichotomous because there is either the complete absence of light or there is some presence of light. Right, so if you're at the beach and it's just overcast, then there's still the presence of light. So in order to simulate, which is what we do, which is why a lot of people have sleep problems, we cheat the body. So when the sun goes down, we tell the body, no, the sun's still up because we turn all the lights on. So as far as our brain is concerned, there is still the presence of light. So it doesn't start going into the subconscious state. Okay. Right.
Oh.
Yes.
Will
Yes.
will we have to know the parts of the endocrine system that you just showed?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, that's just discussion. I will specifically point out the things that I think you should be aware of, and those are coming in some future slides. But for that particular one, that is more biology than it is psychology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you.
That's okay. All right. So the main structures of the body, the two main structures, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is one of the very first things that forms in the embryonic stage. So your brain and spinal cord, of course the heart, but as far as structures, your brain is first structured because the brain and the spinal cord are connected at the brain stem. So just at the base of your neck, or where your neck touches your head, is the brain stem, and that's where the connection is between your brain and spinal cord. So the brain and the spinal cord, if you were to look at this as a macro or micro system, the brain and the spinal cord are your macro system. They cover everything. So everything that happens at some point is going to be received or transmitted through the brain and the spinal cord. But everything else, your fingers, toes, arms, legs, everything else is connected to the brain and into the spinal cord through the peripheral nervous system. So the peripheral nervous system, all nerves and neurons that are not part of the brain and spinal cord are a part of the peripheral nervous system. It connects everything of the body, every part of your body back to the spinal cord. So let's break those out a little bit. So some of the things that happens between the brain and the spinal cord, right, is not only how we send signals through the rest of our body, but neuroplasticity, because through experiences, the brain has the ability to adapt. So now the difference between neuroplasticity and neurogenesis is that neuroplasticity means it takes the existing neural network and may remap it for functionality. So an example, let's say again that you're at the Annandale campus and you live in Springfield. And the way that you normally go home is you come out on whatever road it is, and you turn on Little River Turnpike, you got the 495, go up to 495, and then you take the Springfield exit. Well, for most people, they don't deviate from that path. They always follow that same path every time they go home and come back to school. One day, though, you come out of class and you start to get on the road, and they say that there is a chemical spill on 495, so you can't get to Springfield by going this way. Well, then you will remap it, and maybe instead of going right, you go left and go down to Braddock Road and follow that to get to Springfield. Well, that's what happens with neuroplasticity. You've got the existing network, and just because you haven't used it before doesn't mean it doesn't still exist. So neuroplasticity says, if I forget something or something's not working this way, then I can reorganize the structure of my neural pathway and still get the signal where it's supposed to be. Now, one of the things that we know, and one is, if you aren't familiar, one of the most well-known cases is Phineas Gage. And Phineas Gage, if you're queasy, this is going to be a little gruesome. But Phineas Gage, I'll keep the same picture. But Phineas Gage was a railroad worker. His job was to put the explosives into the ground so that it would blow the rocks and everything out so that they could put the railroad trellises down. Unfortunately, one time he put it down and it exploded sooner than it was supposed to. So the rod that he was using to push it down into the ground went up through his eye and out of his head. Well, of course, they thought he was a goner, but it turns out that Phineas Gage went back to work. And before that, he was considered one of the most gentle, the nicest, kindest guys that you would ever meet. After the accident, he would sporadically curse at people, get mad, have bad behaviors, but his functioning outside of those things was just as it was before the accident. So the brain literally rewired itself. So that's what happens with neuroplasticity.
You don't think he was just mad because he had a metal rod through his eye?
Yep, it literally went through his jawbone, through his eye, and out through the top of his skull. Yeah. You don't want to talk about that at dinner parties. Okay. So, yes, Edwin, neurogenesis is the formation of new neurons. So yeah, neurogenesis, we used to think, or neuroscientists used to think, that around the age of 28, you had generated and you had all of the neurons that you were going to have for the rest of your life. We now know through neuroscience that the brain can literally, through new experiences and events, can recreate new neurons or make new neurons that expand our knowledge, which is why in most instances we promote that even people 60, 70, 80 years old, as long as they are learning and active, their brain can continue to create new neurons and establish itself as a formidable part of life. As I indicated before, let me see, hold on. How about a neuron that is damaged? Now, there's two ways of answering how about a neuron that is damaged. The brain, external to us again, is just absolutely amazing. If that neuron can no longer function significantly, the brain will get rid of it. So it will literally identify it and get rid of it. If it is still functional in some way, it doesn't necessarily recreate it, but it may use it sparingly and redirect the information that normally would go along that pathway on a different pathway. The new pathway does not become stronger than the original. The only time it becomes stronger is if you use it more. Just like learning a new song. If you continue to repeat the words over time, you won't have to try to remember them anymore. They become natural. The same thing happens with our neural pathways. If we remember something, if we practice something more than we do something else, then that neural pathway becomes stronger than the others. Okay, so stem cells. Stem cells, as I said before, are uncommitted cells. Now, Dr. Lipton, that we saw the video of, was talking briefly about that, and he's actually considered the father of stem cell research. He's, again, trained as a medical doctor, but what he found was that, as I said before, stem cells, we are all exactly the same at conception. No cell has been designated for bone, hair, muscle, or anything else. It is simply there. And then what happens is stem cells are identified, and once they are identified for a particular function, they then become committed to the creation of that function. The way that he found this out was he took he took the same stem cell and separated it into 3 parts. He put each of the parts into a petri dish. So he had 3 petri dishes, and each had a stem cell in it. Now again, stem cells have no signature, they're uncommitted. What he did was then change the chemical composition associated with Petri dish 1, chemical composition Petri dish 2, and chemical composition Petri dish 3. The first one became bone, the second became muscle, and the third became hair. So he was able to surmise that stem cells are the same, but dependent on the chemical association that it has with the body, it becomes a different part and serves a different function within the body. Which is why a lot of stem cell research is focused on people with limb problems or other problems, that if they can get the DNA signatures and could recreate the cell associated with that particular part of the body, they could regrow it or recreate it. So that's the idea behind stem cells. Okay. So now, getting back to the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system.
Quick question.
Yeah,
Would stem cells apply to people with a TBI, traumatic brain injury?
That's probably further along than we're capable of addressing right now, only because there are billions of neurons, and we don't specifically, we know when they turn on based on events and even certain thought patterns, but we don't know what happens for that neural network system to turn on. But muscle, bone, those kind of things, I think they're at a point where they can take care of those.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome. Okay, so with the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, we don't know everything. The first time you burned your hand, you didn't know that you were going to burn your hand, or you probably wouldn't have done it. So there are some reflexes that are absolutely because of our peripheral nervous system that the brain is not yet aware of. But one thing for sure, as soon as your brain becomes aware of it, you won't do it again unless you're just looking for a dare. All right, let's see, where are we? Oh, it's 2 o'clock. We're supposed to finish at 2 o'clock, huh? Yep, okay. All right, so let's finish this slide and then we'll close. And so sometimes based on our sensory information transfers that information back through the peripheral nervous system over to the spinal cord. The spinal cord then triggers the brain, creates a memory of that, responds appropriately, so that the next time this happens, it won't, you know better than to burn yourself. But notice the blue arrow says, even though I'm sending the signal to the brain, the spinal cord and peripheral nervous system said, look, we don't want you to wait until the brain says it's okay. Send a signal back and tell them to take their hand off of that hot pot. Right? So some things are done in tandem with the central nervous system, but it does not have to involve the brain as a response mechanism, simply as a learning mechanism. Okay, so we have reached our point. So with that, remember that, let's see, Monday we do not have class because it's Labor Day. So have a great week, have a great weekend, and we will reconvene at this point, or actually talking specifically about the peripheral nervous system on next Wednesday. All right, so that's, unless you have questions, feel free to check out. And if you do have questions, I'll remain on for a moment.
Thank you.
Awesome. Have a
You're
great
welcome.
week, Dr.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for everything, Dr. Humphrey.
You're welcome, Alex. Have a great week, man.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I read something about how when growing up as a baby and like to an adult, we learn how to walk and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And how it's we stick with it.
Yes.
And what I read also said that walking backwards for long periods of time could lead to brain damage. Is that true?
I don't have any data to support that. I mean, because walking backwards is still a function of brain interaction. Now what it might do is, I don't think is a brain function. I think it may affect your equilibrium, because the body is positioned to walk forward. And so all of the balancing muscle movement happens as a result of a natural state of going forward. But our bodies are allowed to walk backwards. So I wouldn't think that that would diminish brain function. It may affect your balance over time. But now your body gets used to moving backwards as opposed to forward. But yeah, I don't have any data to support that it would affect brain function.
Yeah. And my last question was, would you, like, as far as sleep, would you consider, because 8 hours of sleep is like the baseline for a healthy night of sleep?
Yeah, but it's age dependent. Right?
Okay.
Because a baby needs 12 to 14 hours of sleep. But remember, during sleep is when the body actually creates itself or repairs itself. A child is still developing and forming. So a baby needs 12 to 14 hours. A young adult, teenager, late stage teenager, 8 hours is enough.
Okay, so as far as that, would you say that taking a nap inconsistently for 8 hours is the same thing as continuous sleep for 8 hours?
They aren't necessarily the same. They are very close, but they aren't the same, because if you're taking a nap while they're still light, the body is still partially responsive to that light. When it's dark and you're doing 8 hours of sleep, that's different, but they're very similar. As long as you are getting a significant amount of sleep, it shouldn't promote any particular issues. But we do know that sleep cycles are disrupted for people who do a lot of shift work, because their body is awake at night and then they're actually working they're sleeping during the day. If they don't simulate darkness, then it can partially affect sleep cycles, which ultimately can affect your sleep overall.
Okay. All right, that makes sense.
Cool. All right.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Kathy? Oh, you're still muted, dear. There you go.
I was just listening. Thanks. I was just listening to that. That was interesting. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. All right, so you're good for today?
Doing great. Yes, that was
All right.
great. A great class. Thanks.
You're welcome. Well, have a great week, and we'll see you on next Wednesday.
Okay, you too.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Oh, Professor Humphreys, I had a question.
Yeah, I'm still here.
I don't know if you would know this, but what would be your recommendation to make sure that someone went through all of their cycles of sleep, even if they necessarily they slept for 8 hours? What if they didn't get all of the cycles within that 8 hours?
Yeah, that's difficult, because, like I said, the conscious and the subconscious separate during REM sleep, that fourth stage sleep. If someone didn't get that full sleep, and I think what you mean is, they were down for 3 or 4 hours and it was like a light sleep and everything, they kept hearing everything around them. And so maybe a couple of hours, they went into a deep sleep. That deep sleep, I would say for 8 hours, that deep sleep is probably 6 of those 8.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So you can do a couple of things. I mean, people who exercise, if they have sleep deprivation as a result of sleep cycle issues, if they exercise for about half an hour before they go to sleep, that helps. Meditation and yoga definitely help. Now, one of the things that I would definitely eliminate is any kind of light in the sleep area. That includes your cell phone, any kind of radios or anything that has lights associated with it, because those lights simulate the existence of being awake. So if you're going to have your cell phone, or if you're talking about someone else and they have a cell phone, I would either turn it down, and if when it signals for text messages or something, the light comes on, I would put the face down to make sure that light does not happen during that sleep period.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay, excellent.
Great.
All right,
Thank
well,
you.
have a
See
good
you
week.
Wednesday.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.